Welcome to the Yoga Hour, offering insights and practices for spiritually conscious living in today's world. Here is your host, Dr. Laurel Trujillo.
Welcome to the Yoga Hour, where we talk about yoga in all its depth and breadth as a path to spiritually conscious, fulfilled living today. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the show. Before we begin our program today, I wanted to comment that we recently passed our 11th anniversary of the Yoga Hour. The first show of the Yoga Hour was recorded on September 23rd of 2010. You can find links to many of the prior episodes on our website, theyogahour.com. You can also access our full archive at unityonlineradio.org. So check that out. Just amazing to think back that the show has been going for that many years, 11 years now. So today we are discussing the life and teachings of Swami Sri Yukteswar, another of the revered teachers in our Kriya Yoga lineage. Once again, I'm delighted to be joined by the founder and spiritual director of the Yoga Hour, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian. Yogacharya O'Brian is the founder of this show. She is an acclaimed spiritual teacher, poet, award-winning author, and a minister who has served seekers of spiritual enlightenment from all walks of life for over 40 years. She's the recent recipient of the 2021 New Thought Walden Award for Interfaith and Intercultural Understanding. She has published several books, including her latest book, The Jewel of Abundance, Finding Prosperity Through the Ancient Wisdom of Yoga. A teacher in the tradition of Kriya Yoga, Yogacharya O'Brian serves people from all faith backgrounds who are seeking self or God realization or awakening. And she also is the spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, a meditation center in San Jose, California. You can find out more about Yogacharya O'Brien's books and online programs at her author website, ellengraceobrian.com. And again, O'Brien is O-B-R-I-A-N, ellengraceobrian.com, and also at csecenter.org. You can also follow her on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching for Ellen Grace O'Brian. Welcome, Yogacharya O'Brian. I'm really delighted to have you join me today on the Yoga Hour.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. It's a joy to be back, and especially to have this topic that we have today, exploring the amazing life of Swami Sri Yukteswar. So I greet all of our listeners and subscribers with love. I'm so happy to be able to share with you today.
Before we begin our conversation about Swami Sri Yukteswar, let's start with a yoga moment, a moment of contemplation. So let's begin by bringing our attention and awareness to our physical body, feeling our body in space. No matter what we're doing, if we're sitting or standing or walking, just feeling the surfaces that support our weight. So feeling where our feet are. If we're sitting, what parts of our body are supported in the chair or on the cushion. And let's turn our attention to our breath, just noticing as we take a fully conscious breath, the next inhale and exhale. On the next inhale, feeling the cool air in the nostrils. And on the exhale, feeling how the air has been warmed as it passes through our lungs. And then continuing to follow our breath, not trying to change the natural flow, but just noticing. As we rest here, right where we are, here's something to contemplate. Inspiration from Swami Sri Yukteswar. Ever new joy is God. Ever new joy is evidence of God's existence. convincing us to our very atoms. Also, in meditation, we find God's instant guidance, God's adequate response to every difficulty. Sri Yukteswar also said, love is God. If a person properly cultivates this ruling principle, naturally implanted in their heart, they are sure to be on the right path to save themselves from wandering in the darkness. Love is God. If a person properly cultivates this ruling principle, naturally implanted in their heart, they are sure to be on the right path to save themselves from wandering in the darkness. Once again, Yogacharya O'Brian, welcome back to the Yoga Hour. Last week, we discussed Lahiri Mahasaya, the father of our Kriya Yoga lineage, and today we are discussing another important Kriya Yoga master, Swami Sri Yukteswar. But before we begin to discuss Sri Yukteswar's teaching and his life, I know that studying the lives of accomplished spiritual teachers is something that is recommended practice from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in particular Sutra 137. Eugene Davis translates Sutra 137 as mental stability can also be experienced by contemplating the states of consciousness and virtuous attitudes and behaviors of spiritually enlightened saints and sages. Once again, mental stability can also be experienced by contemplating the states of consciousness and virtuous attitudes and behaviors of spiritually enlightened saints and sages. Would you comment more about this? How can we learn from the yoga masters who are no longer with us? And what is the importance of learning their stories and their teachings?
There's so many blessings that come from studying the lives of saints and sages and spiritual masters in one's own tradition. When I listened to my Guru Eugene Davis's translation of that sutra about mental stability through contemplating the states of consciousness, virtuous attitudes, and behaviors of enlightened saints and sages, there's certain things that we see. In the Zen tradition, it said that, to study with a master is to observe how he or she ties his shoes, his shoelaces, right? Be observant of the life itself, because the consciousness, the elevated consciousness of a master illumines the way in which they are engaging in everyday life. And so, when I look at the life of Sri Yukteswar, I see this illumined mind, this, fit body, disciplined life. And even though, he was so, had great breadth in his life, there were many things he was engaged in, and many people he was engaged with, many disciples that he fostered and supported in the field. And yet there was this quiet about him that you can perceive, just from looking at his picture or reading his teaching. So, as I was preparing to have this conversation with you, I was thinking how much he's like the Himalayan mountains, such a spiritual giant. So coming back to why we would study, obviously it inspires us to study the lives of the masters and to look at them in the sense, I think, of how did the teachings transform them? Mm-hmm. Because we get to see in the lives of the masters how engaging in deep study, deep sadhana, and service changed their lives. And since the path is universal, we ought to be able to apply that to ourselves and take on the teachings that they took on in a sense, in the way they took them on, with great faith and earnestness, and apply ourselves so that we too can be transformed by the teachings. Also, I would say that for disciples on a particular path, studying the saints and sages in your path helps you understand more deeply about the path. What informs it, what inspires it, and what are the goals and aspirations of a path, and not just in terms of individual fulfillment, which we have on the path of Kriya Yoga, that the teachings are there to support a person in self and God realization, but the paths have, and Kriya Yoga has, a trajectory of purpose in the world. So as a disciple on the path, it's helpful to know more about that path of world service and world transformation, which you can find out, more about as you study the lives of those who were in service of that.
As you contemplate Sri Yukteswar's life, what is one teaching or lesson that you have found important on your own spiritual journey?
One.
Well, I thought there's going to be kind of other questions sort of like this in the show. I thought, well, let's just start with one.
I know, it's good. It's just, like I said, it's so vast. So I will start with one, and I'll start with what he, I think, felt to be his dharma, his life mission, which was to discover and help people know and experience the unity of religions and spiritual paths. And so you can see much of his life was dedicated to that. And as you talked about the Walden Award in the opening of the show, I kind of thought, I hope Sri Yukteswar would be pleased with that. I think he probably would. Yeah. But interestingly enough, he had this deep balance. He wanted to show the unity of not just religions, but also spiritual paths. So people on different paths of yoga, different sadhus, he would bring together because he wanted, he was curious, and he also wanted people to get beyond their, narrow-minded sectarian differences and dive deep to the root. But he didn't see the paths as all the same, which is a common mistake that newcomers to the path make. They come and they say, they're all the same, or, Kriya Yoga is the same as this path. Well, no, the paths are not the same. And what he was dedicated to was showing the deep, mystical, unchanging truth that is at the root of many diverse and different traditions. But in order to do that, it's necessary for one to be deeply grounded in their own path. And so I thought I'd share with you a quote from him that I think is important to recognizing how to go about this study of the unity of paths. He said, "Sit with everyone, listen to everyone with respect. Remember that a gem could be hidden even in ashes, but your own seat, meaning your own particular spiritual foundation, be very aware of that. Losing your own post and being 5 different ways from following the words of 5 different people won't get you anything. Meaning, one must believe in and be firmly established in the Guru-given sadhana. Only then can one taste the nectar from different flowers and create a chakra garland of nectar." So he was strongly anchored in his Kriya sadhana, and that really enabled him to see the unity at the root of all paths.
And I was just reflecting how lucky we all are that there are so many paths, because not everybody's the same, obviously. And I mean, to me, that's the blessing of having different paths, but also the necessity of respecting the common root, as you said, and not, falling into the trap of feeling like this is the path. My path is the path for everyone. And that's one of the things I do really respect and admire about the Kriya Yoga tradition.
Yeah, me too. And I liked, I was attracted to the idea of unity because I couldn't tolerate the sectarian bigotry, and that narrow-mindedness of, our way is the only way. It didn't make sense to me.
Right.
But it also took me a while to understand that, we each have our own path, and we need to be able to go down into the depths of that path to where the unity actually exists, and instead of trying to superimpose one path on another.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So for our listeners who may not be as familiar with the life of Swami Sri Yukteswar, I would also take a moment just to point you to Yogananda's very important work, The Autobiography of a Yogi, and encourage everyone who has not read it yet to go ahead and read it, because there are many details about Sri Yukteswar's life there. Sri Yukteswar was a disciple or student of Lahiri Mahashaya, who we discussed last week. And Sri Yukteswar was the beloved guru of Paramahansa Yogananda. His monastic name was Swami Sri Yukteswar Giri, and it's important to point out that Sri is not a separate honorific, but is part of Sri Yukteswar's name. Before taking up the monastic life, Priya Nath Karar, which was Sri Yukteswar's birth name, Priya Nath Karar, was a husband, a father, and ran his family's business because Priyanath Karar's father had died young. His wife died early in their marriage, and their only daughter died soon after her marriage. In his youth, Priyanath Karar was educated in a Christian missionary college where he first developed an interest in the Bible. After becoming a Swami, Sri Yukteswar was a progressive-minded figure in the 19th century in the Indian society where he lived and taught. He established syllabi for educational institutions and reanalyzed the Vedic astrological Yugas, which we'll talk more about in a bit. Sri Yukteswar was noted for his sharp mind and insightful knowledge, and he was a respected guru who regularly invited individuals from all social backgrounds to his ashrams to discuss and exchange ideas on a wide range of topics. Sri Yukteswar was also interested in the education of women, which was unusual at that time in the 19th century. In the foreword of Sri Yukteswar's book, The Holy Science, W.Y. Evans Wentz, the author of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, wrote, Sri Yukteswar was of gentle manner and voice, of pleasing presence, and worthy of the veneration that his followers spontaneously accorded to him. Yogacharya O'Brian, coming back to your thoughts on him or your impression of Sri Yukteswar, what most inspires you about his life?
I think when I look at his life now, it might be a different answer in another week because there's so many things about him and his life that are inspiring. But right now, I would say his servant quality, his keen intellect, his curiosity, but my guru said at one point to me, just kind of like, we were just in a conversation, I don't know, about things. And he just said, Kriya Yoga is karma yoga. Meaning this mystical path of great, insight into the nature of reality and the true nature of the self is a life of service. And people often don't realize that. They think, I want Kriya Yoga because Kriya Yoga is going to give me mystical experience. But the culmination of mystical experiences, my guru was pointing out to me with that comment, is service. And that was really the life of Sri Yukteswar. And he was known to be, very exacting with his disciples. He would correct them and was known in some sense to be stern, but he was really training them to be awake, and to be conscious of how you work in the world. And so he said, to become great, one has to be attentive to whatever situation one may be in. That's a beautiful way of seeing, the fruits of a mystical practice. To become great, one has to be attentive to whatever situation one may be in. So that's not only the situation that we're in the moment, right? Being attentive to what are the needs of this moment, whether it's your own physical bodily need, whether it's a need in relationship, in your home, in your workplace, but also what is the need of the time that we're living in. And we're living in, such an interesting time at the edge of this time of pandemic and global unrest and climate change. And so, being attentive to the situation that we're in is a high calling at this time. It's really important. So I would like to offer a quote also along these lines in terms of our approach to being in the world. And Sri Yukteswar said, "If there is some work that must be done, then one should not be disrespectful and careless toward that work, because that disrespectful attitude can plant a seed of disrespect in the mind." In other words, it reflects your own self-sense, right? The religious path is not just meditation and concentration. Without regulating the entire life properly, it is not possible for a normal person to realize the highest ideals. So, there's this balance in life that he stressed, which had to do with disciplined living, that is at the base of, all that we do, paying attention to what the need of the moment is and how to do it in the most conscious, highest way.
Lovely. Sri Yukteswar's major book, The Holy Science, which is still available today, compares scripture from the Hindu tradition with scripture from the Christian Bible. Sri Yukteswar wrote in the introduction, "The purpose of this book is to show as clearly as possible that there is an essential unity in all religions, that there is no difference in the truths inculcated by the various faiths, that there is but one method by which the world, both external and internal, has evolved, and there is but one goal admitted by all scriptures," which we've touched on, that this was one of his main approaches. Why was it important, particularly at that time in the 19th century, to articulate the unity between religious traditions? And then what resonance does that have with us today? And I should mention we've only got about, so you want to go ahead and say something, Uma, and he'll fix this up after.
Oh, okay.
I'll take out this.
So I kind of lost track of where we were. So about why it was important to articulate the unity of these two religious traditions. Well, that was really his life work, to show unity among the traditions. And as I mentioned earlier, he wanted people to be able to get beyond small-mindedness or narrow sectarianism that doesn't allow people to go deep enough into realizing truth and in a sense be able to transform society. And so we can see in the age that we're living in the problems that arise from, religious bigotry and sectarianism. And so to be able to honor the diverse paths, hold to your own, and see a great unity, recognition of one reality is a key to world peace.
I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, producer and host of the show. When we come back from the break, we'll explore more about the teachings of Swami Sri Yukteswar.
Welcome back to the Yoga Hour, insights and practices for spiritually conscious living.
This is Dr. Laurel Trujillo, the host and producer of the Yoga Hour, and I'm here with Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian talking about the life of Swami Sri Yukteswar. And Yogacharya, right before the break, we were talking about the importance of Sri Yukteswar's book, The Holy Science. So let's pick that up again. Can you speak a bit more about the importance of the book, The Holy Science?
Well, I would say probably the main thing is that in reading this, it's really a scripture that Sri Yukteswar wrote. He wrote it in the traditional style of Sanskrit sutras, which he then translated. So he's not translating on another work, it's his original work. And it's an opportunity to experience many things. One, his consciousness. And so what surprised me when I dove into that book, of course, the depth of it was not surprising, but some of the conclusions were interesting to me, given that he's really known as a Gyan avatar, incarnation of wisdom. And, we just look at his picture and you can see, the wisdom scientist, the great heights of his intellect. But when you read Holy Science, what comes through loud and clear is his understanding that love is essential to realization. And so that said so much to me about how this mystical path, in a sense, balanced his nature and is an invitation to balance ours. So when you read Holy Science, and he's looking into the heart of Hinduism, of Sanatana Dharma, and the mystical teachings in Christianity in the book of Revelations, at the depth, what you see is that love leads to wisdom, and wisdom culminates in love. And so there's some, beautiful teachings in there where, like he says, Shraddha is intensification of the heart's natural love. So faith comes from this innate draw of the soul towards spirit. And he says, when this love becomes developed, it makes one able to understand the real position of his own self as well as of others surrounding him. And he talks about how when you have this developed love, and it begins to open in you, that is what leads you to a guru. Even just an inkling of it, as I can say in my own case, that just the faith that I had that led me to find my teacher had its root in love for God. It wasn't developed at that point, but it was certainly there.
Lovely. One of the things I appreciate about the book, The Holy Science, is that Sri Yukteswar discusses the Yugas, which are, Yuga is a Sanskrit word translated as epoch or age. And I think for me, rather than the particular place we are in that cycle is that it's an ascending cycle, that this is part of an ascending cycle, or as we've said, an awakening world, that we're part of an awakening world. So would you comment a bit more about that, about the yugas and how you view their importance?
In the same way, I think, what first came to me in being exposed to this Vedic teaching about the yugas is looking at the bigger picture of life, literally, the cosmological bigger picture. And so that in and of itself was a revolution to me, where we can become so focused on our individual life, the time that we're living in, that knowledge of the yugas, or the ages that occur, over millions and millions of years, has us, find our place in the great scheme of this divine life and divine vision that's so much bigger than what we are. So it gives us perspective in that way. And also, as you and I were talking earlier, it gives us hope to, know that, our world is an evolving, unfolding activity of God. And, Sri Yukteswar, as a scientist and as an astrologer, found some errors in the almanacs, in the astrological almanacs, which culminated in him making some adjustments to the perspective of the age that we're living in, which led to the vision that we are in Dwapara Yuga, which is an ascending age, where consciousness is being unveiled. And he pointed to, several scientific occurrences that gave us, proof of that. And so today we see that more strongly, like our ability to, have the World Wide Web that would show, the oneness of life, is space travel. All these advances in science are harmonious with the indications of consciousness itself awakening. Now, when we look at our world, we can also have the opposite point of view, that humanity does not seem to be evolving at all, but in fact, going backwards. And yet, when you look at the ages that, these occur over thousands of years, you can see that we are in the early stages of awakening. So we're living in a time when there are more people spiritually asleep in the world than there are people who are spiritually awake. And so that's the cause of problems. And it also means, that it's important for those who are spiritually awake, not necessarily to try to convince others of their path, but to really let their light shine in the world. We all have a contribution to make in our awakening world.
As I mentioned to you over the brief break we had there, this is an idea or thought that I find very calming as I see something that's happening in the world that I find to be very upsetting to me, that seems, as you said, that we're going the wrong way, that I can remember that this is part of the awakening process, and it feels very, very calming to me to be able to view things from that perspective, and it's hopeful. It brings me hope, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. Last week, when we were speaking about Lahiri Mahashaya, we talked about the guru-disciple relationship and Yogananda's loving relationship with Sri Yukteswar, which he wrote about so beautifully in Autobiography of a Yogi. Yogananda wrote, "My relationship with Sri Yukteswar was somewhat inarticulate. Quietly sitting beside him, I would feel his bounty pouring peacefully over my being." And Sri Yukteswar said, to keep company with the Guru is not only to be in his physical presence, as this is sometimes impossible, but mainly means to keep him in our hearts and to be one with him in principle and to attune ourselves with him. So would you speak more about this inarticulate relationship or attunement with the Guru?
I can say that it's true, based on my experience with my own Guru. The Guru-disciple relationship in the Kriya Yoga tradition is dedicated, to self and God realization. And so the relationship itself becomes a point of contact for our highest aspirations. So if you have that connection and that purpose, even whenever you think of the Guru, you're reminded of your purpose in this life. But also, when you have a Guru who is steeped in the higher states of consciousness, and you have the opportunity to meditate or study with that teacher, then that experience creates positive impressions in the mental field, so that becomes like, we could say a soul memory. So that when you're not in the presence of the teacher, you still have that experience that you draw from. So even though my Guruji has, left his body, I still feel I can meditate with him, not only because consciousness is not limited to the physical body. So, we are able to commune, but also because of those imprints of higher states of consciousness that he shared with me and the experiences that I had in his presence. I've been reading a memoir by the poet laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo. It's called Poet Warrior. And she's a Native American, and she talks in the book a lot about how important it is to have teachers in life and to have that sacred relationship and what we learn. And excuse me, she had one line there. She said, even standing next to the teacher, we learn. And I really appreciated that because I could relate to it. And I think it has to do with the receptivity that we bring, the love that we bring, that is, love for God, that is the connecting factor. And Sri Yukteswar commented that, he would have these experiences with his Guru, Lahiri Mahashaya, where, he felt that perhaps when he was at a satsang, where the conversation at the satsang would just be lighthearted and joking. And, he, at the time, he would think, well, we're not studying very deeply here. It's just, a rather mundane conversation. But then he would come away from having been with his Guru to see that his deepest questions had actually been answered, or there was some revelation that would occur. And often, how we see this manifest, and it happened to me many times, I would be studying on my own. I would have so many questions about this or that, or about the work the service I was doing. And then I would have a meeting with my Guru, and the questions would be gone. Or I would sit with him in a class and I had no questions because everything was answered by the consciousness that I could access in his presence.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. Paramahansa Yogananda said of his Guru, Sri Yukteswar, "My own temperament is principally devotional. It was disconcerting at first to find that my Guru, saturated with jnana, or wisdom, but seemingly dry of bhakti, or devotion, expressed himself chiefly of cold spiritual mathematics. But as I attuned myself to his nature, I discovered no diminishing, but rather an increase in my devotional practice to God. A self-realized master is fully able to guide his various disciples along the natural lines of their essential bias. So this quote from Yogananda points to the four classical types of yoga: Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom; Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion; Karma Yoga, the path of selfless service; and Raja Yoga, the path of meditation and technique. These four paths of yoga allow people of different temperaments to approach yoga in different ways. Sri Yukteswar understood and respected those temperament types as he worked with his students. So how is it helpful for us to understand our own temperament as we study and practice to experience self and God realization?
I think the understanding of temperament gives us permission, in a sense, to follow our own heart and soul inclination. But I've often seen that as we remain steadfast on the path, we learn more about ourselves than we originally had insight into. So the ideal of the path, with its different temperament types and different avenues for expression, is to find balance in our nature. And so often, people will think that their temperament is of one kind, only to discover that, hidden below that is a depth of another quality. And with regard to Sri Yukteswar, he, of course, was a master of wisdom, but he was not devoid of bhakti. And just as I said, all you have to do is read Holy Science, and it's infused with divine love, with his heart quality. And when you look at his life, you see that he was a karma yogi, that he served people everywhere. He established so many groups. He brought people together to study and to practice. And of course, he was a master of the states of consciousness. So, Raja Yoga was also there with him. So when we look at the lives of masters, like him, and even, of course, in Yogananda's life as well, we see that the temperament becomes balanced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things I enjoyed about reading about Sri Yukteswar in the Autobiography of a Yogi was that he was the source of this idea. He planted this idea for Yogananda to teach and to start a teaching center, which Yogananda, at least from Autobiography of a Yogi, didn't seem like he was really thinking along those lines or valuing that experience. Sri Yukteswar said, God is the honey, organizations are the hives, both are necessary. And then, of course, Yogananda goes off and founds his first school in India, and then subsequently, of course, all the subsequent organizations that he, like Self-Realization Fellowship, etc. So did this advice from Sri Yukteswar influence you when you began the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment?
I would say that it encouraged me. I had a natural inclination, even in my childhood, to bring people together and to form groups for study or practice, whatever it was about. That was just natural to me. And so when I saw that was really what Sri Yukteswar did, and of course he did it for higher purpose, that was very encouraging to me. And when we see, Yogananda's strength of building organizations, so much that he did in such a short period of time, we can see how Yukteswarji had planted those seeds in him and demonstrated for him the importance of groups and organizations. And I have a quote from Sri Yukteswar about that to share with you that I think is helpful. He said, "It is necessary to form holy groups among ourselves for the health of our ideals and sadhana, for the correction of delusions arising from negligence in our own groups, for the expansion and magnanimity of mind, and to introduce people to the path of truth that we found. It was important to organize general conferences or large and inclusive gatherings." Mm-hmm. So, he formed so many different groups, satsang groups, where people were studying, Kriya Yoga teachings together, but then also groups of sadhus and spiritual leaders in which they could discuss and again come back to finding the harmony at the root of their traditions. So he saw, satsang as critical to our learning, so we don't become too complacent or somehow, that feel that our awakening is an individualized matter. He said, self-realization is not selfish realization. So he liked the idea of meeting in groups so that we could learn from one another, so that we could introduce other people to the teachings, and that we, could grow together in harmony.
Unbelievably, we're coming to the last few minutes. We have about 2.5 minutes to go before the closing announcements. So as we do that, as we bring this to a close, what are some words of encouragement or inspiration that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Oh, I think I should leave those words to Sri Yukteswar ji. He said, "Living life easily, playing and laughing is success, of course," meaning having a happy life and being successful. But underneath all of it, one must remember not to cheat oneself. Above all, to be true to thyself, meaning always remain authentic. And when I read those words, I think about, him pointing to, one can be successful in the world, but if you're not in touch with the truth of your own being and in connection with that, what your dharma is, why you're here and what it is that you have to contribute, then your life cannot be called a success.
Very worthy of reflection, I think. Worthy of reflecting on our dharma, our role in this life, and what we are here to do. And as we've talked about, the connection, of course, to realizing who we are and why we're here. When you were speaking about the small groups that Yukteswar founded, it struck me that we should mention that people can still sign up for this upcoming Live the Eternal Way experience, which is an online course that you can find at Yogacharya's website, it's just ellengraceobrian.com, ellengraceobrian.com. And there are small groups, study groups that are available for people to sign up with at various times of the day and of the week. So check that out at csecenter.org. The registration for those small groups closes, I think, in a few days this Sunday. So do it today.
And thank you for mentioning that. It's something, where CSE is celebrating this year our 40th year of service. And that has been consistent throughout the years of the ministry, which is, according to this vision, to bring people together to study, to meditate together, and to discuss. So it is an important part of the path, because it it can deepen your experience and your understanding. And we don't forget what we experience.
Mm-hmm.
We may, if we're just reading spiritual books, we may be, taking in some content, but we forget that easily.
Yes.
Unless there's some experience.
Yes. Pleasure to share this time with you. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, host and producer of the show, and I've been discussing the life and legacy of the great Kriya Yoga master, Swami Sri Yukteswar, with Yoga Hour's founder and spiritual director, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian. Yogacharya O'Brian is an internationally acclaimed spiritual teacher, author, poet, and the founder and spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment in San Jose, California. You can learn more about her upcoming programs, books, and classes at her website, ellengraceobrian.com. You can also find her on Facebook and Instagram at Ellen Grace O'Brian, and you can hear many of her online talks on her YouTube channel, Ellen Grace O'Brian. You can check our website, theyogahour.com, and we will be posting links to the things that we've mentioned, to Yogacharya's website, etc. We also encourage you to join us for the many online programs offered by Yogacharya O'Brian and the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, particularly the ongoing meditations in the morning from 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. Pacific, in the afternoons from 4 to 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and Sunday satsangs from 10 to 11.